38 Special versus 9mm, and why the 38 Special still beats the 9mm. And what I'm talking today is 4-inch barrel pistols, and I'm going off basically law enforcement data. Back in the day, the 4-inch revolver really was king, and a lot of departments switched to 357, but a lot of times they did not. And 38 Special was a cartridge that was used for a really long time in a 4-inch barrel. Now, when they switched over to semi-automatics, a lot of them switched over to a Smith & Wesson pistol 4-inch barrel. So my test pistol is actually going to be this Ruger Security 9 that does have a 4-inch barrel. However, this is a little bit lighter than your original semi-automatic pistols that were often used by law enforcement. But I make the statement, 38 Special, it beats 9mm, how it beats 9mm. And I'm not coming at it from the perspective that a lot of people are looking at it. And I don't mean to be mean to any person, but I feel like the way a lot of people are looking at it is not quite the right way, because they're going into really extreme examples and they're not really looking at the practical everyday examples that they need to be looking at. So I got a whole bunch of information here, and if I'm looking off the camera, that's why I'm looking at this information. And then I'm also going to be doing, my outdoor ballistic test, all of that. So first thing we hear people talk about 9mm, how great it is. And it's always talked about in a positive light, and it's never talked about in a negative light, any of the negatives that could possibly potentially happen with that. They just say, oh, the 9mm is great, it's got so much capacity, it's 100% reliable, all of that stuff. But that's not quite the whole story here. What you often hear is 9mm is more powerful, 9mm has higher capacity. And that is a good point as far as the capacity goes for law enforcement. And it's a very good point as far as like semi-automatic pistols go in general for the military. And higher power, to some degree, matters for law enforcement again. And the reason for that is law enforcement, oftentimes, they face a lot of threats, and the only firearm they have on them is their sidearm. They need a lot of capacity, and they need a cartridge that's going to be able to punch through car doors, windshields, stuff like that. On the other hand, the military, people often scoff at some of the stuff I do with revolvers, and they say, well, if they were so good, the military, they've been using those for 100 years, so revolvers are garbage. The whole reason why the military uses semi-automatic pistols is because they can, take a lot of abuse. They can get sand in them, they can be cleared out of that sand very easily. They're not going to malfunction under the rigors of war the way a revolver might if it gets a lot of junk inside the internals. And the military doesn't even use their sidearms very often. That's just their backup. So I find those arguments really silly, because they're arguing them for the average concealed carrier or the average person that's defending their home. And none of those are really viable arguments, in my opinion. But one of the biggest things, we don't hear this a lot, we hear a lot of people talk about multiple attackers. Multiple attackers this, multiple attackers that. I would never carry a revolver because it only holds 6 rounds or 5 rounds or 7 rounds or whatever, because of multiple attackers. Well, the information and the statistics are still out there that support that the average citizen or civilian, if they get into an altercation where they need a firearm, the average shots fired is between 1 and 5. It's 3 on average. That has not changed. Even currently in 2021, that has not changed. That is still your average. And people are taking numbers that are from law enforcement, or they're watching videos where somebody's trying to stop somebody that's on drugs and they're shooting them 12, 13, 14 times, and they're saying, well, that's what I need. Well, from my opinion, that's not what you need. What you need is what the statistical data says that you need, and that's between 1 and 5. So that's a very important point to be made, and there's another point I'm going to make along with that. And what that point is a lot of times you have these so-called experts, and they will tell you that semi-automatics are just as reliable as revolvers, are actually more reliable, and they never get jams. And revolvers, they can jam. Well, I'm coming from a practical standpoint here that I train with both regularly. I shoot both regularly. I'm consider myself kind of an average guy, but I actually shoot a lot more probably than the average person. And semi-automatics or 9mm in general necessarily being reliable is not necessarily what I'm seeing. And people saying that revolvers are unreliable, I've never seen that either. You know, the typical takeaway is that semi-automatics jam from time to time. Revolvers never do. So when you combine the fact that semi-automatics can jam, they've been known to jam, and I've actually watched a whole lot of, you know, police footage where the cop is tap, rack, bang to get that gun back into service. And I'm not saying that I'm going by law enforcement data here, but what I'm saying is you see it happen, and it does happen. There's not really any statistics out there of how often that happens, but it happens. And my whole point is, as a regular citizen, as a regular civilian, when 3 shots is your average, what's more important? Having a gun that might not be very reliable between shot 1 and 5 but has a lot of capacity? Or a gun that doesn't have a lot of capacity but that is 100% reliable between shot 1 and 5? And shot 1 and 5 is what the typical concealed carrier or home defender needs. And you're going to have 100% reliability with shot 1 to 5 versus maybe not so much with a semi-automatic. That's a big deal. That is a really big deal. That's a big practical issue that a lot of people, they can't seem to get their head around. But that's just how I see it. All right, so back on to ballistics here, energy and all of that. The 9mm typically has more energy most of the time, 4-inch barrel versus 4-inch barrel over a 38 special, but not always. Sometimes you can get some 38 specials that are really powerful. I've shot several out of my 4-inch barrel here that maxed out 520 on one of them, I think 546 foot-pounds on the other. That's where my highest energy 9mm I ever fired was like 420 foot-pounds. But I'm going to go with nothing but typical ammunition in my test and in what I'm going to talk about. But one thing that's not talked about very often, I've actually never heard anybody talk about it, is that the 38 Special performs really well when there's not a hard barrier, and it performs equally well to the 9mm in your average situation with less energy. And why is that? That's because typically revolver cartridges have larger hollow cavities than semi-automatic cartridges. Semi-automatic cartridges, the profile of the nose is always designed to feed first and to expand second. With your typical revolver cartridge, which is 9mm and 38 Special, you always got a larger hollow cavity with that 38 Special because it doesn't need to be designed to feed through a feed ramp. And another thing that's not really talked about is a lot of times you have stuff like this, semi-jacketed, soft point, hollow point, and that will expand with a lot less energy than a typical just simple jacketed hollow point will. So you're getting the expansion you need and you're delivering adequate energy, typically anywhere between 200 and 300 foot-pounds energy into a target out of a 4-inch barrel, and that's adequate, and you're getting the expansion you need without too much energy. That's an important thing. Now, one of the biggest things that's not talked about, so I'm going to talk about it, is the size of the firearm and how that relates to 9mm reliability. I've had several full-size or medium-size 9mm double stacked that are very reliable. But I've had smaller framed ones that once you go to the smaller frame with that same ammo, it's not going to be reliable. And the reason why, part of it is limp wristing, and it's not that you're limp wristing it, it's that sometimes the grips are so small on those small guns that no matter how you grip it, things are going to come back, wiggle around in your hand no matter what you do, which is going to decelerate the slide, and that's going to cause issues. So a lot of times your bigger, your heavier 9mm are always reliable, but sometimes when you go down to a pocket-sized gun in 9mm, not so much. So in my opinion, you know, little pocket guns should be 380. That's my opinion. They seem to work a lot better than taking a 9mm and shrinking it down. As where revolvers, you know, you can put a 38 special in this, it's going to be 100% reliable. You can do it in this little 12-ounce gun, it's going to be reliable. It's not really going to matter on the function of that firearm. It's going to be 100% reliable. Whether you have a 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum or a little 22, that reliability is going to be there no matter what size the gun is. So that definitely is an important thing. Now, one thing to talk about here is felt recoil. There's definitely a difference in felt recoil between 38 special and 9mm. Now, my examples of guns that I'm going to be testing aren't quite fair here because this gun weighs, I believe it's somewhere around 25 ounces, something like this, and this is 39 ounces. But if we were to compare one of the first 4-inch 9mm revolver, semi-automatic pistols that was law enforcement, that was the 5906 Smith & Wessons, I believe, and different variants of those Smith & Wesson pistols, they weighed pretty much exactly the same as the 686. Right around there, right around 40 ounces. And if you compare those two particular firearms, what you have in recoil energy of 38 special plus P even, is you have about 3 foot-pounds of felt recoil energy in a full-size 4-inch barrel revolver like this. You take that same weight 9mm pistol, you have about 4 foot-pounds recoil energy, felt energy. You take a little bit lighter gun like this polymer one here, you're talking 5 foot-pounds felt recoil muzzle energy. So there's definitely a difference there in your felt recoil, and that can make a difference to a lot of people. Now, another thing, internal ballistics. When we look at 9mm, when we look at 38 special, I believe 9mm is 35,000 psi pressure with the standard pressure, and I think it's something like 37 or 38,500 with a plus P. 38 special, I believe it's 17,000 with standard pressure and 20,000 with a plus P. And then you also have CIP specs, which is the European version of SAMI. What they have is, I believe it's 21,700 for 38 special, and then like 34,000 and some change with 9mm. But just to round it off, you're talking about twice the pressure with 9mm versus 38 special. So what that's basically going to do, it's going to put a lot more wear and tear on your firearm. Probably not enough to matter, but that's just something to keep in mind if you're going to fire a lot of rounds. Now, what I did is I went through some ballistic information, and I went to Chuck Hawk's. They have like a condensed version of quote-unquote stopping power. I know a lot of people don't like those charts. They don't like the term stopping power. But when I use the term stopping power, what I mean is cartridge effectiveness. And what I did is I went and I looked at all the 9mm, you know, some are plus P, some are standard pressure, and all the 38 special, some are plus P, some are standard pressure. And I took out all the ones that were actually fired in real world situations through 4-inch barrels. And I took the ones that were jacketed hollow points, and both of them, either jacketed hollow point or semi-jacketed hollow points. And I averaged all of that together, and I came out with what the average round is, and the average bullet weight, the average energy and velocity, and the average stopping power. So what we basically have with the 9mm is your average is 115 grain bullet at 1238 feet per second, 392 foot-pounds, which is a lot of energy. When we look at 38 special, your average is a 125 grain bullet at 977 feet per second out of a 4-inch barrel, 264 foot-pounds energy. And those are really far off. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, it's probably 50% more energy with the 9mm. But here's my point. When we average out the stopping power, this quote-unquote stopping power, where we have one-shot stops with both of those, the 9mm, out of all your averages of jacketed hollow points, was 85.4%, which is actually really good. That's not a bad thing. It does very well for what it is. The 38 special with like 50% less energy, we were averaging 71% one-shot stop statistics, which again is still really good. You're only about 14% off of that. So not a huge difference, lesser difference in your, you know, quote-unquote stopping power than what there is between the energy. And that's one of the biggest points I'm trying to make here, is that you don't necessarily need the energy that the 9mm has to be effective. But what that extra energy is good for, it's good for penetrating hard barriers. The 9 millimeter, the way that that bullet nose is designed is a little bit narrower, and the velocity that it gets with those light bullets, it does very, very well at penetrating hard barriers. And we're going to test that in the wood penetration test. As where 38 Special typically does not penetrate hard barriers very well. So that makes a lot of sense here what I'm talking about, because 9 millimeter, do you want to have a whole bunch of extra hard barrier penetration if you're using it for home defense or concealed carry? Probably not. But if you're a law enforcement officer, you got somebody driving at you with a car or a truck trying to run you over, do you want that hard barrier penetrating power? I would say probably. So those are two very, very important things to think about. Two legitimate situations where you got somebody in your house, you're trying to defend yourself in your house, and you're not wanting your possibly missed rounds to go through walls and go into your neighbor's house, which could happen with a 9 millimeter. But on the street, if you're law enforcement, you know, you're not going to want only 6 rounds, and you're not going to want the fact that it's not going to penetrate hard barriers very well. So that's a very important thing to take into consideration. Another interesting set of statistics that I saw was the Greg Ellifritz statistics, where he did a whole bunch of different studies. I think it was like a 10-year study where he kind of combined some of his one-shot stop statistics, and he did a bunch of other stuff to kind of condense the information down to be a little bit different than your old one-shot stop statistics. And it's very interesting what he found. 38 Special versus 9 millimeter. The percentage of the shots that were fatal: 9 millimeter 24%, 38 Special 29%. I don't know why that is necessarily. And then we have the average shots to incapacitation, to where the person stops. So this is going beyond one shot stop. It's going into the average shots to incapacitations. The average with 9 millimeters, 2.45 shots to incapacitate. The average with 38 Special, 1.87. It's less. And this is kind of painting a picture, which I'm going to point out here, between the percentage fatal and the average shots fired here. Now your head or torso accuracy percent was 74% with the 9 millimeter, 76% with the 38 Special. And your overall one-shot stop percentage: 9 millimeter, 47%, 38 Special, 55%. And there was also one more set of statistics here. Percentage that was not incapacitated is actually higher with the 38 Special, 17% versus 13% with the 9 millimeter. So I don't really understand that particular one, but the rest of it kind of paints a picture. 38 Special, it seems to be getting more accurate hits, which is making the percentage fatal higher. It's making the shots to incapacitation lower. So I think that kind of paints a picture that if you have less rounds and you have a revolver, it's shooting more accurately, or you're shooting more accurately, or you're making those shots with more intent than what you are with a semi-automatic, because you have more rounds. So very interesting information here. And the last thing I'm going to point out here before I get on to doing these particular ballistic tests here is the decibels, the decibel sounds. And I looked up what the average is, and that they're taking, you know, high-end ones, low-end ones of cartridges, and they're averaging the sound decibels. And keep in mind, anytime you go up 10 decibels in sound, you're doubling that sound. So if you have, let's say, 150 decibels, 160 is twice as loud as 150. So basically what we had for the average decibels for 9 millimeter was 160 decibels. 38 Special on average was 156. So you're talking 40-50% quieter. And your 38 Special from a handgun at arm's range was pretty much in line with like a 30-30 rifle, stuff like that, as were your 9 millimeter kind of in line with a 30-06. So definitely a higher chance of getting hearing damage with the 9 millimeter than the 38 Special. In fact, I fired 38 Special without hearing protection before. Actually fired both. I couldn't tell a big difference there, but obviously there was just a little bit more snap with that 9 millimeter. It hurt a little bit more. So definitely something to take into consideration. I said before that the average one-shot stop from those Chuck Hawks statistics was a 9 millimeter average of 115 at 1238 for 392 foot-pounds, all that. What I'm going to do here is I'm not going to go by the bullet weight exactly, because I'm going by energy numbers here. And I'm going to use bonded bullets in both, because I think that's really, really a fair way to do it. And the most fair way to do stuff like that is to not necessarily use the same brand, but use what I think the best is to compare to each other, and what I think law enforcement would carry in a revolver if they were still carrying revolvers to this day. And that's the Winchester Ranger plus P 130 grain and the Gold Dot 124 grain plus P. Both bonded bullets, 124 grain, 125 grain. And the reason why I'm using the Gold Dot here, because your average energy with the 9mm was 392 foot-pounds, and what I was getting in this particular load here was 398 foot-pounds. It's really close to what those averages are. And the 38 Special, again, really close. The average was 264 foot-pounds, and I was getting 261 foot-pounds when I chronographed this in the past. So we're really, really going to be close to those averages here. And, you know, reloads, I'm going to do some reloads along with the ballistic test, and obviously semi-automatic, pretty easy. Another options we have here, we have the speed loader, the HKS. We have these Zeta strips, or they're speed loader strips. We got regular old speed loader strips. Here's one I've not showed on the channel before. This is called a click loader. This is kind of a patent pending device. And what's really interesting about this is the only way for those rounds to come out is with the center pin here. And absolutely nothing. I can't even fit my finger in there. We'll release those rounds, pull up your revolver, line it up. Once it hits that center pin, we're loaded. So I think that'll be interesting to use something like that. And I have a kind of a surprise for competing with the reload time of the semi-automatic with the revolver. So let's go out to the range and get started with the ballistic test and our practical accuracy test.
All right, we're ready to do that test. And what I have, of course, is that Winchester Ranger 38 Special plus P 130 grain and the Gold Dot 124 grain plus P. I have absolute confidence in these rounds. These are definitely rounds that I would say does represent what I'm trying to represent here. They're both law enforcement rounds. This Gold Dot is actually the official NYPD load out of a 4-inch barrel, so very interesting there. And I think this would be a law enforcement load if a revolver were to be used nowadays. So I'm going to see what we get here. Got our wood penetration pack here. One thing to point out though, the Winchester Ranger 38 Special plus P is the only 38 Special plus P outside of like Buffalo Bore and Underwood that has a bonded standard bullet. The only other bonded 38 Special plus Ps are designed for short barrels. That would be the HST and the Gold Dot short barrel. There's no other plus Ps other than this. So I think this is going to be our perfect 4-inch barrel load. So as always, we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then we'll just do our standard ballistic test here, which this is going to kind of represent human pectoral muscle with a sternum or ribs behind it. 1 3/4 inches pack of bologna covered by 4 layers of denim, 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard, and typically how most ammunition stops in these water jugs, it's about the back of jug 3, which indicates about 15 inches comparison to ballistics gel. And then we're also going to do our kind of practical accuracy reload test. So enough with that, let's get started with the test. All right, I'm about 5 yards from the target, about 4 yards from the chronograph. Start up with the Gold Dot and see how it compares to the average round that we had for stopping power. 1179, 1153, 1201, 1145, 1169. So a pretty powerful round. Let's see how that 38 Special compares. All right, 38 Special, we'll see how this compares. 961, 947, 943, 953, 971. And you're kind of seeing here, you know, I'm just an average shooter, but for me, you know, the less recoil, the heavier muzzle, I can kind of see why the accuracy on that Greg Ellifritz test kind of favors the revolver a little bit, because those are typically 4-inch barrels used. So Let's hit the ballistic box and see how these two compare to each other. All right, first up we have that 9mm plus P. We'll see how this does. And there's a lot of damage there. That's really, really impressive. All right, there's a lot of bologna that I picked up off the ground. This is pretty typical damage that what we see with 9mm. And here's where it impacted the fiberboard. And we can definitely see here, but by the time it impacts this fiberboard, we're definitely getting expansion. So it definitely expanded in this bologna pack. So let's see what we got in water jugs. All right, our first jug, it just absolutely destroyed this thing. This is a lot of damage. This probably kind of indicates why a lot of times 9mm might have a little bit more stopping power, quote unquote stopping power. A lot of damage. Jug 2, right through that. Jug 3. Little dent out the back of jug 3. It's going to indicate about 15 inches comparison to the ballistics shell. So let's take a look at this bullet. So what we got is exactly what I expected. We have perfect gold dot flowering. You know, this is a really good round. This is the round I typically keep in my 4-inch barreled pistol. It's been very accurate, very reliable. A lot of damage here, a lot of expansion. Very good round overall. Highly recommend this round in 9mm, at least a 4-inch barrel. Let's see how the 38 compares. 38 special, we'll see how this compares. All right. All right, as expected, the bologna pack stayed together. However, there's still just a ton of damage in this bologna pack. Made a pretty respectable size hole and took a lot of that bologna pack out with it. As far as the fiberboard, that's actually a much larger hole where it impacted. So it looks like we have a little bit larger bullet diameter as it impacted this fiberboard and exited. So let's see what we got in water jugs. Our first jug has a lot less damage than the 9mm, but there is just a ton of debris, fiberboard denim in there, and it's just a really big hole in this water jug, which definitely does again indicate that it impacted this first water jug with a lot bigger bullet. Jug 2, we just went through 2, impact on 3. There's a little mark in jug 4, a little mark coming out the back. So the 9mm, I would say about 15 inches. This probably, because it's leaking, maybe 15.5 inches. I mean, it's really, really close as far as penetration goes. So let's see what we got with this bullet. And what we got is really good expansion. Very similar size to that 9mm, similar everything. So through our bologna pack into our water jugs, we had the same penetration, expansion with both. Did excellent. Both of them did excellent. Just a little bit less damage to that bologna pack with the 9mm. And next up, our really defining factor, our wood penetration test. And I think that's really going to matter to some people. So let's hit that wood pack and see how these two compare to each other. All right, first up, 9mm. I'm going to hit this a couple of times and then I'll switch on to the 38 special, do the same. All right, let's try the 38 special. All right, 38 special, let's see what we get here. All right, let's open that up, take a look. All right, here we are. Here's our 9mm and 38 special. There's our first board. Interesting here. Went through the first one. Here's our second board. This is interesting because in the beginning of the second board, we can actually see that first impact with the 38 special, and that bullet is right there. And it's filled with wood, but actually the petals did expand pretty big. It's really interesting. But it looks like our second 38 on board 2 kept going. And here's our 38. It's roughly halfway in the second board here. This is kind of interesting here, because what we got here is our second 38. Here's board 2. It's not as a dramatic difference as I thought it would be, but it's definitely a difference where we're having a little bit less hard barrier penetration with the 38 Special. Because here we are, 38, about a third of the way through, about a half of the way through, 9mm, all the way through, bore 2, and basically all the way through with 9mm again. So, interesting test. Now let's go on to the practical accuracy and just see what I can do with these guns when we have to shoot maybe more than how many rounds that gun holds. Now there's absolutely no denying that the semi-automatic has faster reloads and more capacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 16 rounds on target, and to do that I'm going to put 8 rounds in each magazine, just different ammunition, different hollow points, kind of staggered. I don't have any target ammo. But I'm going to put my reload here in my pocket because I will definitely reload with my left hand. And I'll just see what I can do with 16 rounds at that target there. So let's see what I can do. Definitely a lot of firepower going on there. Now let's try the Revolver and see how that does. All right, I got some Target 38 Specials. I happen to hand load a lot of these, so I'm definitely going to use these. 158 grain with the max charge of universal powder. And I do have a speed loader on a pouch here. And I keep it on my strong side. That's definitely where you'd want to have it if you're going to do a reload. And let's see what I can do. 38 Special. HKS loader. All right, not too hard to place those shots pretty accurately. I have one more test, and I'm going to put 16 rounds on target with revolvers very quickly. So here we are, 16 rounds of 38 Special. How am I going to do that, and how can I possibly compete with a semi-automatic? Let's see. Out of ammo. All right, can you put rounds down range with the 38 Special if you have to? I'd say you can. And that's one of the reload techniques a lot of people talk about. They say, well, you know, it's a little bit easier. Just grab a second gun. If one's out of ammo, it's not working, get the second gun. That'll put rounds on range faster than what you can reload a revolver. So is it practical for all people? Probably not. It's probably more practical and easier to carry a magazine with a lot of rounds of 9mm and simpler for most people. But what I'm saying is you definitely have some advantages with 38 Special that you don't have with 9mm. The controllability, shootability, all of that. And you just have a really good platform for a particular purpose of self-defense that I think is doing extraordinarily well, even in the 21st century. So that's my whole point of this video. I just wanted to show 9mm versus 38 Special. When you really compare them with your averages fairly, that's what you get. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.